Will joining us again for our second talk this year. And I'm excited for this topic too, because we're going to get a history lesson in how things have maybe gotten better. Asterisks. so I'll let Will take over from here, and welcome.
Yeah, I didn't intentionally scale the talk from a.
Oh, that was my interpretation.
But I think it'll go in that direction. I hope. We'll see. I'm in a hotel, so lighting's not excellent, but we'll work with what we have. So I'll screen share some slides, and then we can dive in from there. Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about a history of DAO coordination from science fiction origins to today. I personally, I'm Will. I'm a co-founder of Syndicate. We help set up investment DAOs. We have over 25,000 investment DAOs created on our platform. And I've personally been in the crypto space since 2013. I got into Ethereum in 2014. I took the $10 I got for free from Coinbase and put it into the Ethereum presale. I invested in the DAO in 2016. And I want to share some of the insights of seeing all this crypto history and how it's changed DAOs today. This is going to start with the fact that DAOs were science fiction actually relatively recently, and go to where we are right now as a crypto community. So pre-2016 was before there were before DAOs. Again, people will debate what a DAO is. I personally demarcated as 2016. We actually have the starting point for the idea of DAOs. It came from a book called Daemon by Daniel Suarez that's referenced in the Ethereum white paper. So Daemon was written in 2006, before Bitcoin was created. And Daemon focused very heavily on how this kind of autonomous system could run. So there was this computer code that essentially would replicate itself and run itself and coordinate people. And Daemon, being written prior to Bitcoin, focused very heavily on how this code stayed online, how this code operated, because in 2006, the science fiction interpretation was that keeping code online in a decentralized way was an extremely difficult task, one that was nearly impossible. And the book talks about how essentially difficult it was for this kind of decentralized network to remain online. In Daemon, interestingly, it's a very heavily automated definition of DAOs, where DAOs in Daemon were essentially coordinated by this one central entity using automatic computer code, and everything was pre-programmed into branches. So there was not any governance, there was not any voting, there was not a concept of sub-DAOs in a significant way. People had very little autonomy in these systems, and it's a very pessimistic vision of DAOs, which is interesting. It didn't use the word DAOs, it used the word Daemon to refer to them, but it directly inspired DAOs in the Ethereum white paper. The second book was Freedom, which was written in 2010. And Freedom is very interesting because you can see in real time, 2006, the ideas described in Daemon were science fiction. 2008 2009, Bitcoin started to emerge, and the ideas started to become reality. And then 2010, Freedom, the things that were impossible in 2006 were suddenly not only possible, but easy in 2010. So Freedom is a much more optimistic vision of DAOs, and it focuses heavily on these semi-autonomous groups, essentially having really broad goals set by the Daemon, the computer program that coordinates everything. But all of these groups operate pretty independently. There is some lightweight version of governance, but it's not heavily focused on. It's much more these highly autonomous sub-DAOs that have their own internal economies and can coordinate or operate independently. So one thing that's really fascinating is that in Daemon and Freedom, governance was not a main focus of DAOs. It becomes a main focus later on, but the science fiction that inspired DAOs does not cover governance a lot. It covers it a bit, but the core feature was the autonomous nature of these computer programs that define DAOs, not the ability to vote. So that was essentially where we were in 2010. We have some kind of sketch of DAOs. They look kind of viable, still science fiction, but starting to look more and more possible. 2013 was when DAOs were defined in the Ethereum white paper. DAOs, this is where the definition was laid out formally for the first time. DAOs, as many of you likely know here, stand for Decentralized Autonomous Organizations. Decentralized being there's no central party, there's no central actor. Autonomous being that it can run without needing human intervention, and organizations, pretty straightforward, people coordinating around some shared goal. The Ethereum white paper specified what a DAO could do. It said that a DAO can vote, a DAO can spend funds, and a DAO can modify its own code, often via governance. This is very interesting because when you take this interpretation, you realize that a lot of things that we call DAOs might not be DAOs under a strict definition of the Ethereum white paper, but definitions evolve over time, and that's perfectly fine. And some of the things that we don't view as DAOs actually meet the textbook definition of DAOs. The one example is Uniswap as a protocol. I'm not talking about Uniswap DAO and the Uni token, but Uniswap, the protocol, which can execute automatic swaps as an automated market maker. That looks like the vision that the Ethereum white paper laid out of a decentralized autonomous corporation. Essentially, a structure where one token equals one vote, and it's a entity that is not necessarily profit seeking, but structured more similar to a corporation that might otherwise seek profits. The very interesting part about this definition of a decentralized autonomous corporation that the Ethereum white paper had is that the Uniswap protocol itself, by this definition, is a DAO. It is something that can operate autonomously. The Uniswap protocol can modify its own code by choosing to flip a fee switch or not. It can choose to spend funds if it does decide to flip that fee switch, and it can vote. Users can vote to turn that fee switch on or off. So that's one very interesting example where a lot of protocols meet this 2013 definition of DAOs, and most people today would not refer to them as DAOs. Likewise, a lot of groups today, their DAOs can't necessarily, for example, modify their own code, or maybe they don't have voting, maybe they don't even necessarily spend funds, maybe there's no treasury, and some of those things are called DAOs today. So I highlight this because definitions evolve, and if someone says like there's a real DAO, there's a fake DAO, there's a true DAO, there's a false DAO, a lot of the things that people don't view as DAOs are DAOs under the white paper definition. A lot of the things that people view as DAOs are not DAOs under the white paper definition. So definitions evolve over time. That's great. If anyone tries to draw a really hard line in the definition, remember that most protocols fall under this definition, yet we don't call them DAOs today. The Ethereum white paper, in addition to laying out decentralized autonomous corporations where one share equals one vote, and they look kind of like businesses, they can possibly make profits. There's also decentralized autonomous communities, which is laid out in the Ethereum white paper, where one member equals one vote. And this is very interesting because the Ethereum white paper didn't really cover how these decentralized autonomous communities can be formed because of the risk of Sybil attacks. Sybil attack is when you essentially create a lot of fake identities, and then like if it's one member equals one vote, you can overwhelm anything with your fake identity. And that's very easy to do in the crypto space if an identity is a wallet address, because it can generate millions upon millions upon millions of wallet addresses. It's harder to do with things like with various systems that become identity systems that try to prove your humanity in various ways, or try to create verifiable track records, verifiable credentials. The very interesting thing is that the Ethereum white paper essentially said decentralized autonomous communities are one member equals one vote, and you can enforce membership somehow via ensuring that everyone is human. And it kind of left the implementation details out for that. And that's still an unsolved problem today, nearly a decade later. But there is something that's really fascinating about this definition of decentralized autonomous communities, which is that the decentralized autonomous communities, one member equals one vote, looks kind of like NFT projects today. NFT projects are not one member equals one vote because we have not solved the problem of Sybil resistance and fake identities, but instead it's often one NFT equals one vote. So this is another really fascinating example where some NFT projects, don't have treasuries that are accountable to communities. Some do, and those NFT projects that are accountable to communities, where those treasuries can be voted on by the members of it. Those also look kind of like a pretty traditional white paper definition of DAOs. Not exactly. We haven't solved Sybil resistance. Maybe in another decade we will. But this is just all to highlight that this history is very interesting because all of these concepts evolve over time. What we view as DAOs in 2013 is different than what we view as DAOs today. What we view as DAOs today will also be different a decade later. So a lot of people have different definitions of DAOs. That's okay. Those definitions change over time. And I think this is a really fascinating dive into this part of the history because the definitions don't align with what we call DAOs today, even though it is the truest definition we have. I don't believe that there are true or false definitions, but some people do. And these definitions are what's stated in the white paper. So 2016 was the DAO. It was the first DAO on top of Ethereum, depending on how you define a DAO. One of the earliest ones. And the DAO is super interesting because it was an investment DAO on top of the Ethereum network. And it essentially was structured to fund projects in the Ethereum ecosystem. Every time a project would come up for a vote, you could say yes if you wanted to allocate your funds to it. You could say no if you didn't. And projects would be funded via this community. And it was super exciting at the time. It attracted 14% of all Ether in existence, 150 million in 2016 prices. It was 32 billion in pre-crash dollars. I pulled these stats a little while ago, so they might be a little outdated. But it was like 32 billion in pre-crash ETH prices. So that was an absolutely fascinating time. And the thing that was very interesting about the DAO was that it was really seen as this incredible bottom-up initiative where like it just captured everyone's imagination of, wow, we can all fund things together. We can all make these decisions together. We can all create this ecosystem together. And that's part of the reason why it attracted 14% of all Ether in existence. Another reason that's under discussed, but relevant for the time, is that the DAO also was one of the only things you could really do on the Ethereum network back in 2016. There really wasn't much that you could do. And like the DAO was cool. You just sent Ether to the address, you got some DAO tokens back. And there wasn't much to do. So a lot of people were like, oh, an opportunity to use my Ether with smart contracts. That's cool. I think that's also an under-discussed aspect of the DAO history. Like, did it attract 14% of all Ether in existence because people were incredibly excited by the idea of funding the Ethereum ecosystem together in such an early stage? Yes. Did it also attract 14% of all Ether in existence because nothing else was really going on? Yes, that's also true. So if we replicated the DAO today, and I very much see what we do at Syndicate as a spiritual successor to the DAO in many ways, probably wouldn't attract 14% of all Ether in existence, but hopefully quite a bit. And the DAO is very interesting because the DAO was the first time the Ethereum community as a whole was faced with a massive coordination problem. So some of you may know this, the DAO was hacked. the 14% of Ether was drained by some black hat hackers who were stealing the money, some white hat hackers who were saving the money for other people. And the DAO was hacked before it even got off the ground. It was hacked due to a bug that is now well known today, known as a reentrancy attack. But security best practices were not as developed at the time. So reentrancy bugs were, while something that existed back then, not something that was as common knowledge as today. And the Ethereum community had a choice. They had to coordinate and decide: do we want to essentially undo this hack and give back the Ether to the people who originally put it in, or do we want to keep the hack in place? And 14% of all Ether is now in the hands of mostly hackers, and like that could like drastically affect the network down the road. But maybe it is what it is. The code had a bug, and the bug was exploited, and code is law. So that bug should stand. And this was the center of a very significant ideological debate in the Ethereum community at the time, which is that there was the code is law debate. So essentially, some of the community thought that anything that was in a smart contract was essentially like what people should be bound to. If the smart contract is written correctly, then everything operates correctly. The smart contract has a bug, that's still what people chose to put money into, that's still what people agreed to. So they agreed to the bug as well. Code is law, and therefore it shouldn't be changed. The other part of the community thought that the intention of the creators mattered, and that a bug is not an intended functionality. A bug is an accident, and the bug should be essentially undone because it wasn't what we meant to happen. So that was a very significant split. The people who thought that code is law did not agree to fork the chain. They chose to stay on the old version of the chain, now known as Ethereum Classic, which still exists today. And the people who thought that the bug should be undone thought that agreed with the new version of the fork and undid the hack. And that's Ethereum. That's what we use today. So there are two versions of Ethereum in existence. One where they believe in this code is law principle. One, the one that pretty much all of us use today, where we do not, and we believe that bugs are accidents and not what people are signing up for, so to speak. And this is very timely to discuss because there's another debate in the Ethereum community right now about a chain fork between Ethereum proof of stake and Ethereum proof of work. And that will also lead to a fork in the chain. And it could play out like Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, where Ethereum ends up gaining all the usage and all the value, and Ethereum Classic is mostly not used very much. Or it could play out where there is some significant group of people who agree to adopt Ethereum proof of work. I personally think it looks more like an Ethereum and Ethereum Classic situation, where most people will move to Ethereum proof of stake, and that will be the version of Ethereum we all use, and that Ethereum proof of work won't be likely to be significant. But that's just my own personal opinion, and we'll know in a week how it plays out. And this is interesting because there's both like the high level, like what the fork did for the Ethereum community, which was helped people settle the debate over code as law. That is a very important piece. But then there's also a personal and practical aspect, which is a lot of the people who put money in were also people who had significant adoption of the network as miners, for example. And some of the people who put money in lost money and wanted to get that money back. So like when people talk about 2016 solve the code as law debate because we all use Ethereum and not Ethereum Classic today, is that true? Yes. It is also true that a bunch of people chose to use Ethereum instead of Ethereum Classic because they got their hacked money back in full on Ethereum, and they got only a portion of their hacked money back, the amount of money that was returned by white hats on Ethereum Classic. So just like how the DAO gaining 14% of all Ether in existence was partially a function of the excitement and partially a function of the fact that there just wasn't much to do back in the days, us using Ethereum over Ethereum Classic today is partially a function of this belief in that code is not law, and that bugs are not part of agreements. But also it was people who lost money and wanted it back. So there's always this this like in the moment is very different than how people look back retrospectively. In the moment, there's usually a lot more motivations at play than just one high level principle. And that's very important to keep in mind when thinking about the history of crypto, because it's not all a smooth journey, and there's lots of like personal factors that can influence people at various points in time. 2017 to 2020 was like the next phase of essentially DAO coordination. So just like how we went from science fiction, where DAOs started out as these like sub-DAO looking kind of entities without much governance, to the white paper, which focused heavily on voting, to the DAO fork, where there wasn't even any voting. You just decided whether to fork or not fork. The next stage of DAO coordination is generalizable DAO tools started to emerge. 2017 to 2020 is how I demarcate the era. Aragon was started in 2016. So it's not a perfect definition, but it's when these generalizable DAO tools started to come to prominence. Many of you likely use Gnosis. It's a multi-signature wallet, and it's typically used for off-chain governance. So you have a small number of signers who are essentially the ones who can execute transactions to move funds or upgrade the DAO's code, and a large number of people who can vote about how those funds should be spent. Some people will tell you that Gnosis safes are not real DAOs, that they're fake DAOs. One thing that's interesting is like a Gnosis safe does meet the definition of a DAO in the Ethereum white paper. It can vote, it can spend funds, it can modify its own code. The votes are being done by the multi-sig signers, not being done by all of the token holders. So under some definitions of DAOs, Gnosis safe and a multi-sig is a DAO. Under some definitions of DAOs, if you view it as it must be on-chain token voting, it's not viewed as a DAO. So these definitions are always a bit tricky, and that's something that you'll definitely see recur throughout the history of DAO coordination, that these definitions and ideas change over time. In my opinion, Gnosis safes are DAOs, can be considered DAOs, and that on-chain governance is not a critical feature of DAOs, but other people disagree. Moloch and Aragon are two solutions of this era for on-chain governance. Moloch is used by the Moloch framework was set up to fund public goods in the Ethereum ecosystem, and to help solve coordination problems. Moloch comes from the idea of Moloch, the god of coordination failure, and everyone tries to get together to slay Moloch to essentially solve coordination problems. And that is Moloch DAOs are used today in Metacartel and similar groups, and they rely on-chain governance and voting via token holders. Aragon also is a tool more focused on DAO communities and DAO discussions, and it also uses on-chain governance. In addition, not exactly, in addition to this is also compound-based governance, Compound Governor Alpha and Bravo, which is a voting framework as well, and that tends to that tends to be used alongside other systems, for example, like Tally for on-chain voting. So these were very generalizable DAO tools. They didn't try to take an opinion on any one use case. They tried to be very broad. For Gnosis, on-chain governance was not a critical feature, and it was broader than just a DAO tool. A multi-signature wallet can be used for all sorts of things, more than just DAOs. It can be used to also secure your own funds, secure your friends' funds, hold and there's a lot of things that you can do with Gnosis that are beyond DAOs, and then Moloch and Aragon specifically we're focused on DAOs in particular. And this era ran through 2020, pretty much through the end of DeFi summer. 2021 saw the rise of vertical specific DAO tools. So instead of one generalizable framework, there started to be tools for specific types of DAOs. So Syndicate, for example, for investment DAOs, Juicebox and Mirror for crowd funds, Party DAO and Coop for group buying NFTs, CoinShift and Parcel, treasury management, Utopia, payroll, Llama, accounting, guild, token gating, lobby, knowledge management. This list could easily be double, triple, quadruple the size. 2021 saw this huge explosion of tools, and it was because people realized that specific DAO use cases were best served by specific tools built for them. And people began to migrate to those tools. For example, at Syndicate, we focus a lot on flexibility for investment DAOs. Some investment DAOs want to have a fixed price for their investments. Some of them want to be able to change the price. Some of them want to have membership based entirely on deposits. Some of them want to be able to select their members in advance and allow in members they think are really helpful and kick out members who are problematic and maybe unhelpful or disruptive. And the investment DAO frameworks that we're building at Syndicate are built with a particular use case in mind. Likewise, Juicebox, for example, is built for essentially like they call it transparent treasuries, where you can put money into a Juicebox fundraise. You can also get refunds back from that fundraise if the DAO has more capital than it needs. DAOs can also make excess funds redeemable for end users at any point with this refund functionality as well. Party DAO operates on top of the protocol formerly known as fractional, and it like directly fractionalizes the NFTs on a protocol layer so that they're held by a specific smart contract that can handle auctions for those NFTs. So these vertical specific DAO tools started to rise up in 2021, and that is where we are today. So that is the history of DAO coordination from science fiction to today. Probably have time for one or two questions if there are any in the chat.
Yeah, maybe this is a question for me, and I'm going to apologize for putting you on the spot. But did you notice any kind of trends as you were looking at this evolution in terms of like why some of these things didn't take off? Like, is there something common here, or is it just that we changed the goalpost and we had to then adapt to how the tools would get us to accomplishing a different goal?
Yeah. I think that as the Ethereum network gains more users, what those users look for and what they care about and don't and care less about starts to change pretty dramatically. So, for example, in 2016, gas fees were very low. On-chain governance cost barely anything. There was no reason not to use it. Everything was on-chain, and there weren't browser-based wallets. So you had to use desktop wallets with direct smart contract interactions. So having everything on-chain made sense because you couldn't have like off-chain interfaces easily. It was just didn't exist at the time. And then 2017 to 2020, those were really where there were very few DAOs before then. Maker was the most prominent pre-2017 DAO. And 2017 to 2020 was an era of essentially trying to define what DAOs are, what they look like, and using the concepts that we know from before, and very much trying to be unopinionated, because who knows what DAOs will look like. 2021, these tools can start to be more opinionated because we know what DAOs look like more clearly. They have now gone from pure science fiction to a few experimental examples to lots and lots of examples. That setup allows us to start to build tools that meet those specific needs that we know about. So I think it's as knowledge increases in the space, and as users change in the space, and as gas fees change and prices change, these DAO tools naturally adapt, because the Ethereum network's not static either. The people who use it, the cost to use it, how you use it, whether that's from browsers or direct smart contract interactions, all changed over this time period as well.
No, that's totally fair. Another question, we'll just make this the last one. Obviously, as you the last slide talked about all the tools that are available right now for DAOs to operate, and we're kind of seeing specialization here as well. Do you believe that these things remain unbundled, or do you kind of believe that eventually this will be bundled together, and sort of how do you compare and contrast that to things going on at Syndicate?
Yeah. I mean, of course, I have my own bias. My bias is that I believe these will remain unbundled, and that's what we're building towards. We're building towards investment DAOs specifically. My own, broadly speaking, my belief is that DAOs are a structure as transformative as corporations, but likewise, the idea of a generic corporation is really hard to serve. Like the industry it's in matters a lot. The types of people who run it matter a lot. The goals that they have matter a lot. Like, and that likewise, just like how the needs of a small business, of a single person consulting business to a small business in a local area to a Fortune 500 company, like they're all corporations, but they all look very different, have very different needs, and would not be served by the same tools. I think DAOs are the same way. Investment DAOs of a few members look very different than investment DAOs of dozens of members, and those look very different than investment DAOs of thousands of members. Yep. And those, in addition, look very different than community DAOs, which might not be trying to make a profit, but might instead be trying to seek out a specific goal and bring about some kind of thing they want to create. So is it possible that there's some kind of DAO super app that handles all these use cases 10, 20 years from now? I don't view it as likely because there's no corporation super app either. The needs vary so widely between companies that I think DAOs will be the same way.
I guess like for tooling to like help operate, do you kind of believe that's more likely? I mean, this would be your analogy of kind of HR services and accounting and largely like the corporate account management as an industry exists for generalized organizations, but do we kind of still believe that treasury management and financing and payouts and payroll and all that will be offered more and more in a bundled form?
Yeah, I think that it's a little hard to say because there's also this like meta level question of, do we even need DAO specific tools at all? I think the answer is yes. I'm building them, I invest in them. Like I have a significant portion of my like career, my time, and my assets tied up in these.
A little bit of bias there, yes.
So I mean, but it's also because I truly believe it. I have the belief first, and then I execute on that belief rather than the other way around. So I think that DAO specific tools do need to exist and will exist. I think that there's a kind of like a big question mark, which is the regulatory situation for DAOs. Right now, DAOs, from a regulatory perspective, look either like companies or nonprofits. And a lot of what DAOs can do have to like contort to fit into these definitions. And if they're forced to fit in these definitions, well, if a DAO looks like a nonprofit and it's regulated as a nonprofit, then maybe it should just use nonprofit tooling. Maybe it doesn't need DAO tooling for nonprofits when it's forced to act like a nonprofit. But I think that the more crypto native experimental end of the spectrum is where DAO tools will likely thrive first. That's only a weakly held belief. Syndicate, we're kind of on both aspects. There's some groups that are super experimental and totally on chain, and some groups that are using corporate entities and manage a lot off chain. So I only have a weakly held belief on that. I wouldn't say I've formed a particularly strong opinion either way. But if DAOs are allowed to act like truly crypto native DAOs, I think we'll also see more innovation emerge. If DAOs are forced to look like companies, well, then maybe DAOs won't look that different from companies. So like the regulatory situation right now I think has hindered innovation in a significant way. And I think that if that embraces the truly cutting edge autonomous features of DAOs, that we'll start to see the DAOs be able to like really like roam free and experiment more.
I think that's a perfect note to end this on. So really appreciate this, Will, and thanks again for taking the time today. And if you can share the slide deck, we'll also make that available for the attendees.
Thanks so much. Anyone can email me at will@syndicate.io or find me on Twitter at Will Papper. Definitely happy to chat about our new list.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Talk to you soon.